Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today, as promised, I'm going to talk about my adventure trying to find the comic book stores, the Ghost Stores of Fredericksburg, Virginia, and surrounding environs, plus some other comic stores. So, recently had a trip down to Virginia to visit my in laws, and we spent a day in Fredericksburg. And now, I've been to Fredericksburg before, visiting Civil War battlefields, but today on our trip, we were focusing on comic book stores. And I talked a little bit about this last time, but if you do a Google Maps search of Fredericksburg for comic book stores, you're going to find a crazy amount of comic stores. There's actually 4 comic book stores listed in Fredericksburg, which is an amazing number of comic stores for a city of the size of Fredericksburg. So I was really excited. Here's the issue. There aren't 4 comic book stores in Fredericksburg. There's only one. So this is a public service announcement. We're going to go over everything. Last video, we talked about Watts Comics. Now, Watts Comics is really cool. What it is it's a kiosk that's inside of a coffee shop where they sell indie self-published comics, stuff like I do. And so I thought that was really cool. It's not a comic book store, though. It's just a single kiosk inside a coffee shop. So I did a whole video about that and how you can actually find a bunch of really cool comics just in the antique stores nearby. But that was the first comic book store we tried to go to, and it wasn't there. But there were still 3 more comic book stores on the map, right? And we tried to go to all of those. And so here's what happened. First of all, there's a place called the Comic Monster. Let's put the map up here of where these comic stores were supposed to be, and then I'll just blow them up and show you where they actually are. As you can see, there's only one. But on the map, so besides Watts Comics, there's one on the south side of town called the Comic Monster. And we went down to that location, we drove all around, and there was nothing there. There's a UPS store there. And so here's the trick. If you go into the Google listing for Comic Monster, it's going to have all these glowing reviews. It's going to have one of those little things that Google has saying how busy the store is right now. That's based on absolutely nothing at all because there is no store. They're just making that up. But if you keep scrolling down, eventually you'll find a little notice on the listing from the people that run Comic Monsters. And what that says is, we don't have a store. It's an online only store, and Google Maps has placed them there because that's where they mail the stuff out of at the UPS store. So there is a little notification there, but you have to actually scroll down through all the other stuff that makes it look like a real store. So Google Maps completely wrong on this, and it's not the only one they're wrong on. So we drove up to the other 2 comic book stores that were supposed to be right across the street. So there's all these shopping plazas, and there's one here, and there's one here on the opposite sides of the highway. And the first one we went to is called Sage Mantis Comics and Games. Only one problem, there's no comic books there. If you go, again, it's listed in the title. They have a photo of the outside of the store where it's got a sign saying comics. And they have photos from inside the store showing all these boxes of comics. None of that exists. What there actually is a really cool gaming store. It's got a lot of card games and video games and a gaming space. But according to the workers there, they don't have any comics. They used to have comics, but they got rid of all the comics at the beginning of the pandemic when they had to close down for a bit and restructure whatever. I guess comics just, there's a lot of problems with comics at the time. And so they haven't had comics for 3 years. So all of those photos, all the stuff in the listing about comics is all 3 years out of date and has never been fixed by Google Maps. So at this point, we're 0 for 3. Right, we've got Watts Comics, which is really cool, but is actually a coffee shop. We got the Comic Monster, which is also from all the reviews, a really great place to get online, like signed merchandise, but there's no store there. It's a UPS store. And we got Sage's Comics and Games, which again, very cool. If you're into games, no comic books. So there is one comic book store in Fredericksburg, and that's Gateway. I think it's called like Nova Gateway or something, or Gateway Nova. But anyway, now this store has a ton of stuff. It's absolutely massive, like warehouse size. Aisles and aisles and aisles of all sorts of merchandise, games, action figures, Funko Pops, whatever, just like tons of stuff. And then in the back are just like dozens and dozens and dozens of long boxes. They have dollar boxes, they have $3 boxes, they have boxes where everything is priced. I mean, they have tens of thousands of back issues. They also have stuff at the front of the store. Now, up at the front, they have all their old stuff. That's where if you want the Bronze Age stuff, and if specifically you want the Silver Age and the Golden Age books, they're all up at the front behind the counter. So all of the stuff from, 1975, say, and earlier, it's all up at the front. And again, they have tons of stuff. And all of the stuff in the backside of the store where you have sort of the filler stuff, and again, there's tens of thousands of stuff. They're all perfectly cheap. Again, dollar boxes, $3 boxes, lots of comics for $5, $8, $6. That's all great. The stuff at the front of the store, which is where all the cool stuff is, for me, wildly overpriced. Now we're going to talk, and I always try and be fair here, and I'm not trying to poop on the store, because they do have a lot of really cool things, and the prices are totally reasonable for 95% of the comics they have there. So all of those tens of thousands of sort of uninteresting to me back issues, but that other people could very well be looking for, totally reasonable priced. But the really cool stuff at the front, where they have all the stuff I was looking for, I thought some of the prices there were just crazy. And I'll just give one example, because as we're going to talk about in a minute, they actually had a second location that we went to. And the second location, I was looking through this stuff, and perfect example, they had a number of copies of some Atlas comics, 1975 Atlas comics, first issues, Scorpion being one of them. Now, Scorpion, not particularly desirable comic compared to any of the other Atlas comics. Relatively easy and common to find. Some interest because it's Howard Chaykin, and the character later was converted into Dominic Fortune at Marvel, right? So there's some interest in it, but it's not difficult to find. And it's like an Atlas first issue. You've seen me buy some of these on here, not Scorpion in particular, although since I've been to that store, I actually did get a Scorpion one at a different store, which I'll show you in the next store visit. But the upshot is, not a big deal. I would expect a Scorpion #1 in nice condition to be somewhere between $5 and $10. $10 is max for me on a Scorpion #1 in nice shape. What they had at this place was like 10 copies that were all in nice shape. So I think they were probably new old stock, sort of copies that were never actually distributed. Someone, early speculator bought 100 copies, something like that. Just the feel that I had just looking through them is there was like a block of 10 of them. They're all in nice condition. $30 each. $30 each. So all of the stuff that I was interested in, all the cool Silver Age books, Golden Age books, key issues, I thought they were all 3 to 4 times what they should have been at in terms of pricing. So again, just absolutely tons of stuff. And if you're looking for any of that other stuff I mentioned, the games, the merchandise, the action figures, and any of those back issues from 1980 to present that are non-key issues, tens of thousands of them, and the prices were totally fine for all of those. But for me, the cool stuff. Yeah, that was a pass. Now, there are a couple other comic stores that I want to mention. So here we are. Again, only one of the 4 comic stores in Fredericksburg exists, but there are other comic stores in the area. We didn't get to one. There's one in Aquia Harbor. So if you're going north towards Washington, there's one right off the highway in Aquia. We didn't get to that one, but there are 2 more in the next town up. And again, these are on Google Maps. We're across the street from each other, 2 plazas right across the street, right? And these are up in Woodbridge. So you keep going up 95 a little while longer, get off the highway. There they are. It's called Painted Visions. And then a second location of the store I was just talking about, Nova Gateway, right? So we went to the Nova Gateway first because it happened to be on our side of the street. We get there, no comic book store. It's a locksmith. And so, long story short, they're moving locations. And the new location isn't open yet. And I called them, and the guy was like, oh no, we're still here, but only the back office is open. So that stumped us because the building was locked. But we walked around the back side of the building, and there was a second entrance on the back side with a sign taped on it saying that was the entrance to the comic store. So we went in there, and there was a very confused worker in there who clearly wasn't expecting anyone to find him in this secret cave. And they had a fair amount of back issues. So that was the only thing in there. It was just a little office, like the size of my room I'm standing in here, with 40 long boxes. And there's some cool stuff. We looked through them. But again, this is where I ran into, 10 issues of Scorpion for $30 each. And then they had another Atlas. I forget which issue it was. Something similar. And those were like $25 each. And I was just like, if it was $5, I would have bought one. But, so we ended up, I didn't get anything there. Now we went across the street to Painted Visions. Painted Visions is a really interesting store. Had a lot of really cool stuff, a lot of new stuff. They had a good array of new indie books. They had a nice array of graphic novels, stuff like that. And they had a back room that was absolutely jammed to the gills with manga. So that was really interesting because I don't actually see that in a lot of comic stores, but manga, for the younger generation is actually much more popular than American style comics. So it was really cool to see a comic store embracing that side of things. Only downside was I asked about back issues, and basically there was a convention that day, and they had taken all the back issues to the convention. So they had a few up on the wall, and there was a few keys that were CGC up on the wall. So just to give you, the only one I remember price-wise is there was a Fantastic Four 52 CGC 6.5 that they had priced at $1,250. So I don't have GP anymore, but if you do, you can figure out whether it's reasonable. I don't really know. But it seemed like a really cool store. Is just, they didn't have any back issues. So we looked around a little bit, and I got one thing I'll show you in a minute. From there, we went around the corner, a couple, the whole area is just strip malls. So we went a couple other strip malls over, and there's a semi-used bookstore called Second and Charles. And in the back of Second and Charles, they have a huge comic book section with I want to say, just doing some math, 60 long boxes of comics, and almost all of them were between $1 and $3. Now there's a few that I found that were $8, but just a lot of stuff there. Definitely worth someone's time to dig through all those boxes. We were there about a half an hour. I didn't really find much for me, but I've got weird tastes. So all of this being said, here's the conclusion. Firstly, don't believe anything Google Maps tells you in this area because it's completely wrong about just about everything. Um, there are a few comic book stores and they have a lot of stuff. They just weren't really my style of comic stores, but what I had a lot of luck with was stuff that wasn't comic stores. So, as I talked about in the last video, I found all sorts of cool stuff in Fredericksburg in the antique stores. Second and Charles up here in Woodbridge had a lot of stuff, and I did get a couple things, but only a couple. So this is probably the smallest back issue haul I've ever done in one of these videos. But I wanted to cover these comic stores, partially just to document the experience that I had at them, but also so you'll know if you're going through Fredericksburg and you see those 4 juicy comic stores, don't waste your time going to most of them because they don't exist. But I did pick up a couple things. Now, first thing I got here at Painted Visions, I got this variant cover for Love Everlasting #1. They still had some of the early issues. I think they're up to issue 10 now on the stands. Now, I have a different variant for this first issue that looks, I've shown before, it looks like a 1950s Charlton romance cover. But I never got around to reading it. This time I did read it, and I wish I had read it earlier because it's deconstructing the tropes of the classic romance genre. So the comic is about it's the first issue here. It's set up just like a romance comic. There's like 3 short stories, and the first one, it just goes through just like a normal romance, everything exactly like you get out of a romance comic from 1960. And then the second one starts off going the same, but then partway through it, the woman, it's the same woman in both stories, but it's like everything else is different time period, different, everyone else is different. She starts remembering the previous story. And then in the third story, she remembers both of the previous stories and she starts freaking out because she's aware that she's stuck in some kind of weird thing where she keeps being forced to live out these weird little romance stories, and she doesn't know why or who any of these people are, and she gets really confused and she's trying to break out of the cycle. That's the first issue. So there's a lot of stuff in there about, there's obviously some metaphors about the roles of women, but there's a lot of stuff about how romance comics work. It's written by Tom King, great art by Elsa Charretier. I don't know how to pronounce her name, I'm sorry. But it's right up my alley, of course, as a romance fan. So I should have read the first issue back when I got it. So now I'm going to do a little bit of catch up. The other thing that I got at Second and Charles was this. It's Prez #1. It's a 2016 Prez #1. It's a reboot, of course, of Joe Simon's Prez from 1973. Now, that version of Prez is one of my favorite comics. I absolutely love the original Prez. I have read some of the later Prez stuff because he's been used a little bit in sort of Vertigo stuff and post-irony comics and stuff. Like, very different takes on Prez. This is a whole different reimagining of Prez for sort of the social media era. Typically, I find stories that heavily revolve around social media and like smartphones and all of this stuff to suck. But that's probably because I'm 50 years old. I know they're trying to talk to the younger audience, which I completely approve of. I just don't find any of that stuff interesting, either in real life or in stories about those things. So I also felt like this issue, like, you don't even really get through the setup by the end of the first issue. There's a lot of stuff where there's a lot of like board meetings with different corporations and stuff. They're setting up the world more than the character or, like what the actual story is. And so there's a page after page of like stuff that I just don't think is central. So I didn't love it. But, as a Prez fan, I had to get it. It was only $1. So why not? The other thing that I wanted to show is something I actually got in Fredericksburg at one of the antique stores last time. It was a used bookstore that had a lot of comics. I didn't get any comics at that used bookstore, I just forgot to, because of that, I forgot to put this in the last video. So I'll show it off here. It is The Mystery of the Wandering Caveman. This is the Three Investigators, book number 34. Let me see, can I get that in focus at all? 34. So I've mentioned before, when I was a kid, I had a complete set of all of the Three Investigators novels. I had all the Trixie Beldens. They've got the number right there, so I can get the whole set. So that was sort of before I was collecting comics. I was in collector mode, but it was with these. And obviously, big influence on me with creating Crimebusters, my comic series about college students who are sleuths investigating supernatural mysteries. Three Investigators, huge influence on that. I absolutely loved these when I was a kid. So I've only got a couple of these. I think this is like, you don't see them around very much anymore. The only other one I have is book 1, which I actually got in a used bookstore in New Zealand when I was on my honeymoon. But when I saw this, I had to get it, so I was excited to get that. But that was it for this haul. So all the really cool comics that I got in Fredericksburg last time, I guess I used up all my luck, because when I got to the actual comic book stores in the area, didn't really work out for me personally in my collection. But again, these, don't just take my word for it. Check out these comic stores. Again, the Nova Gateway, I feel a little bad about talking so much about how overpriced I thought their key stuff was, their old stuff. They do have just tons and tons and tons. I can't emphasize how many back issues they have there, and most of them are totally reasonable. So for normal people who are collecting normal things, you could probably find all sorts of stuff. Just wasn't quite for me. But that's it for this time. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you next time.